So for the last time, I would like to welcome Luke, Tyrone, and Daniel, and I would like to thank them, for their great playing and participation in this session. This time I asked Luke to compose a contrafact based on the isotope progression by Joe Henderson. And I asked him to use different scalar patterns as a kind of compositional model, and also different motivic developmental techniques, such as inversion and retrograde and others. So the name of the composition is Top Set.
One, two, and 1, 2.
Very nice. So, Luke, tell us about your compositional process.
Okay, so like you said before, this is a contrafact on a Joe Henderson tune called Isotope. And so now, I mean, in jazz history, there's been this kind of lineage of contrafacting tunes, of taking the chords to existing tunes and writing new melodies on them. So I decided to keep the chords of Isotope and write a pretty related new melody to it. For example, pretty much the first motive, and then some of the later motives, but especially the first motive, is an inversion of the first motive and the actual tune. So when I was writing it, I was like, okay, how am I going to write something that's related to it that is enough different? And I said, okay, let me just invert the shape of this line. And so that's my first idea. And then later on in the piece, I used a lot of chromaticism, and I was basically capitalizing on something that Joe Henderson does, where he kind of plays like a really bluesy idea, but it's like a half step away or a tritone away from the related harmony. So when I try to compose some of these really blatantly bluesy ideas that were, a half step away from the chord, but still were enough related to the first motive. And then the title is also like I guess you could say, inversion of the word isotope.
Yeah. Okay, excellent. So now, before we talked about the use of different scalar patterns, and this tone and these chord changes lend themselves perfectly for the use of its familiar 1, 2, 3, 5 patterns that both John Coltrane and Joe Henderson utilize in their playing. So now I ask Luke to demonstrate the use of these patterns in the context of his composition, Top Set.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3.
Excellent. Great solo. Very idiomatic playing. And I've noticed that you did something particularly idiomatic for the sax players. You kind of superimpose the Coltrane changes over the pre-existing chord changes, which is very effective. And you could hear the clear definition of his lines using simple 1, 2, 3, 5 patterns over these the so-called Coltrane substitutions. So tell us a little bit about the way you practice these to get to that point that you are right at now.
Well, okay, so using these, like you said, the 1, 2, 3, 5 pattern, so you can practice those. Well, first of all, everything should be practiced slow on a metronome at least. Quarter note equals 50, quarter note equals 60. Because the slower you can play them, the slower that they're in your fingers, the more easily they'll come out in a fast tempo tune. So one way to practice like a pattern, like 1, 2, 3, 5, would be ascending, descending. So invert the pattern 5, 3, 2, 1. Maybe alternating, so 5, 3, 2, 1, and then the next inversion of the pattern, so 1, 2, 3, 5, or 1, 2, 3, 5, 5, 3, 2, 1. And then you can practice that pattern going around the cycle of fourths, cycle of fifths, ascending in half steps, whole steps, minor thirds, major thirds, getting as much mileage as you can out of that one particular pattern. And then taking them around like the cycle of fourths or fifths will kind of render that like Coltrane sound. Right. So
it was very, very, very effective. And it just tells you how, when you compare our first performance with Charlie on the Now's the Time progression, and you compare it to that progression on Isotope, you can see how different blues progressions can get and how different we can approach them in terms of different improvisational techniques.